Hello, scholars, and welcome to another exciting screencast in U.S. history. Today we'll be focusing on Chapter 10, Section 2, Dealing with Other Nations. By the end of the screencast, you should be able to tell someone how U.S. foreign affairs reflect the new national confidence. If you cannot accomplish the following section objectives by the end of the screencast, you must ask a peer for help, rewatch or reread the screencast, read the section. Pages can be found in the About section of the classroom, or schedule a conference with me. Now, these are here for you to be able to tell if you understand the material that you will be quizzed on. So in order to be as successful as possible, this is totally on, you guessed it, you. Uh, our first section objective is explain why Spain ceded Florida to the United States. And before we begin, I'd like to remind you that throughout this you are expected to have these notes. How you choose to copy them down is up to you. My recommendation would be to wait until the summary slide, and you can either summarize those or you can write them word for word. But be careful about summarizing just in case you don't want to copy something down incorrectly and get it wrong in the quiz. So, why did Spain cede Florida to the United States? After the War of 1812, Spain had very little control over its territory in the Americas, but especially in Florida. Runaway slaves kept escaping from Georgia and Alabama and into Florida. And once they were there, a lot of them would join the Seminole Nation. This was a nation of Native Americans. And often these Seminoles would cross over the border into the United States and they'd raid American settlements. Now, in 1817, the U.S. government sent Andrew Jackson to recapture those who had escaped slavery. Jackson attacked and destroyed Seminole villages, and he goes a little bit farther than he really had orders to do. And he seizes two very important Spanish towns and even forces the governor from Spain to flee Florida. Jackson's attack showed that the United States could take over Florida whenever it wanted. Since Spain could not protect Florida, it decided to give up the territory. In the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819, Spain ceded or gave up Florida to the United States. By this point, your notes should look something like this. Again, you can summarize if you'd like, but just be careful what you're summarizing it to say. Objective 2. Describe how Spanish territories in the Americas gained independence. The American and French revolutions had inspired Latin Americans to want to control their own affairs. They didn't want to be controlled by Spain any longer. Excuse me. Revolutionary movements were growing in almost every single one of Spain's colonies, and Spain really just didn't seem able to control the pressure for change in Latin America. Mexico's struggle for independence begins in 1810 when Father Miguel Hidalgo organized an army of Native Americans that actually ended up freeing several provinces in Mexico. You can think of a province like a like a state in the United States. He was, however, captured by some troops that were loyal to Spain and eventually executed. But another revolution broke out in Mexico in 1820, and this time Spain was unable to end the fighting. In 1821, Spain agrees to Mexico's independence. At first, Mexico was set up to be ruled by an empire, but in 1823, the monarchy was overthrown. A new constitution, patterned after the United States Constitution, made Mexico a federal republic of 19 states and 4 territories. In South and Central America, we also see movements for independence. In the northern part of South America, a lot of this is led by a man by the name of Simon Bolivar. So in August of 1819, Bolivar leads an army on a daring march from Venezuela over the ice-capped Andes Mountains and into Colombia. There, he defeats the Spanish and becomes president of the Independent Republic of Great Colombia. Today, that land would include Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and Panama. If we go a little bit farther north, in between South America and Mexico, is the region known as South America. So inspired by what is happening in Mexico, inspired by what Simon Bolivar is doing in South America, nations in Central America declare their independence from Spain in 1821. 2 years later, they formed the United Provinces of Central America. It included today's nations of Nicaragua, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. In 1822, Brazil announces independence from Portugal. Soon after, the United States recognizes the independence of Mexico and 6 other former colonies in Central and South America. By 1825, most parts of Latin America had thrown off European rule. Here is what South and Central America would look like, with Central America existing in between Mexico and South America, these nations over here, South America existing over here. So Simon Bolivar would be most prevalent up here. Okay, at this point your notes should look like this. Again, feel free to summarize if you'd like. If not, we may continue. Third objective, explain why the Monroe Doctrine was issued. So, after Spain's colonies have declared independence, several European nations indicate that they might be willing to help Spain take them back. This really worries the United States and Britain, who really wanted to protect that trade that they had established with these new Latin American countries. Originally, Britain and the United States agreed to issue a joint statement, and it would announce their determination to protect the freedom of these new nations of Latin America. The Secretary of State at the time in the United States was a man by the name of John Quincy Adams, who convinces the president that the United States should take this action alone. He believed a joint statement would make the United States look like Britain's junior partner in this deal. President Monroe agrees. So in a message to Congress in December 1823, the president stated what is now known as the Monroe Doctrine. The United States would not allow European nations to create American colonies or interfere with the free nations of Latin America. The United States would consider any attempt to do so dangerous to our peace and safety. At the time, the United States was not strong enough to block European action. If they had invaded with the full force of their military, like their army and navy, we wouldn't have been able to stop them on our own. Really, only the British Navy could do that. We still had their backing, not in writing, but the British would have protected us at the time, or protected these nations if that was the case. But eventually, over time, U.S. power grows, and the Monroe Doctrine boosts the influence of the United States in this region. Let's talk about how Canada became self-governing. Since 1791, Canada was divided into 2 parts, Upper Canada and Lower Canada, with the upper part being mostly English and the lower part mostly French. Now, if you have to remember that before the American Revolution, there was a war we call the French and Indian War, and at that time, the country of Canada was owned by France, so a lot of French-speaking people there. After that war, Britain claimed it. So over time, it was a British colony. They divided the country into these 2 parts, Upper and Lower Canada, because there's more British people in the north, upper, and there are more French people in the south, the lower part. But in 1837, there are several rebellions against the British control of Canada in both Upper and Lower Canada. So the British realize that they can no longer deny rights to Canadians. The British would have to give Canadians more power of self-government, which we know is the right of people to rule themselves independently. The Act of Union of 1841 was a major step in that direction, and it merged Canada's 2 parts into a single unit governed by a Canadian legislature, which is a lawmaking body. Britain, however, does maintain ultimate control. They have the final say on anything that happens there. Canada and the United States had their own disagreements, and tensions were particularly high when the United States unsuccessfully tried to invade Canada during the War of 1812. The situation does, over time, improve after the war. Between 1818 and 1846, the U.S. and Britain settled several border disputes regarding Canada. It's a long border, a lot of different places where people disagreed on what was Canada, what was the United States. But eventually, the United States and Canada established excellent relations, and to this day, they remain very strong. At this point, your notes should look something like this. Again, feel free to summarize if you'd like. If not, you may write word for word what I've put. These will be the tidbits of information that you will be assessed on at the end of this week. Remember that if by this point you cannot accomplish these 4 tasks to my right, you must do one of the following, or all of the following. Ask a peer for help. Ask someone to explain this to you. Rewatch or reread the screencast. Pay particular attention to this section. Read the section. You can actually read the note or the book itself. The pages can be found in the About section of the Google Classroom, or you can schedule a conference with me. And remember that our section focus questions, so how you should, or what you should be able to answer to anyone that asked you by the end of this, how U.S. foreign affairs reflect new national confidence. Thank you for your time. We will see you next week with our next screencast. Thank you and goodbye.